You are listening to PowerScore's Law Practices podcast series. Today's topic is the practice of environmental law. On the program, we will hear from John Pendergrass, Senior Attorney at the Environmental Law Institute, and Amy Armstrong, President of the South Carolina Environmental Law Project. Environmental law is a mixture of state and federal statutes, regulations, and common law principles that cover a variety of environmental subjects, from and not limited to water and air pollution to endangered wildlife. Our first guest, John Pendergrass, offers a little more of an overview to what environmental law is.
There's actually sort of two branches of environmental law. The laws that control, regulate pollution, so the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, laws that regulate solid and hazardous waste, handling and disposal, cleanup of sites that are contaminated with hazardous substances, and production of chemicals, toxic chemicals in particular, pesticides, etc. And then there's also the laws that govern natural resources, the laws that govern protect endangered species, use of forests or other lands, national parks, wetlands, etc.
Amy Armstrong also offers a description of the specific law practice and what her organization, the South Carolina Environmental Law Project, has to do with environmental law.
I mean, environmental law is a very broad field. It involves, on the federal level, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. It involves CERCLA, the Superfund Act that's intended to restore, clean up sites that have been contaminated in the past. RCRA, which is the Hazardous Waste Act. There are like different. That's on the federal level. On the state level, we've got the South Carolina Pollution Control Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act. We've got regulatory laws that are intertwined with really administrative law. In a lot of ways, environmental law and administrative law kind of go hand in hand because to impact natural resources, to discharge pollutants into the air, into the water, you have to get a permit, and those are issued through the regulatory agencies, both on a state and a federal level. There's also, environmental law that's not really outside of the scope of what I do. We try and prevent environmental damage from occurring before it occurs, so we get involved in the administrative stages where permits decisions are being made, and also when there are other environmental regulatory statutes implicated, like the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires an environmental assessment before a project can begin. The other environmental laws I'm just not as familiar with, the Superfund and RCRA and different laws that regulate, or that aren't regulatory laws. They're more designed to fix a problem that's already occurred. So that's a little outside the scope of what I do, although there are practitioners in South Carolina that practice regularly in those areas. It's sort of outside the scope of what I do. The Environmental Law Project is a small, nonprofit, public interest organization. So we are not a law firm. We operate like any other public charity. We're funded on donations and grants, and all the work that we do is got to be in the public interest under IRS guidelines to be able to qualify as a 501c3 charitable organization. So it's a little bit difficult to encapsulate the entire field of environmental law in a brief overview, but it's sort of a combination of regulatory and administrative law that we practice in at the Environmental Law Project.
As a law student, if you're considering environmental law, Amy suggests that you get a feel for it in a variety of areas, like classes and jobs.
There are two different ways to come at it. Like I said, we're a we represent environmental groups and citizens that are trying to protect the environment. There are also a lot of lawyers that represent development interests, that represent industry, and so I guess starting from that, whether you where you want to go. So that would be like kind of the first question. I mean, the next part is just to take some classes in environmental law, kind of get a feel for it. I mean, as far as getting experience and kind of understanding what it's all about, trying to spend a summer clerking with, with either a firm or with a nonprofit or wherever you decide your interests lie.
John also suggests that students need to have a basic goal of protecting the environment if they're interested in this practice of law.
Well, it's a very satisfying field to work in, regardless of who you're representing. I think everyone in the environmental law field has as the same basic goal of protecting the environment, natural resources, promoting sustainable development, which is development that protects the ability of future generations to also grow and develop, so keeping the resources in good enough shape so that they can be used. And whether people are working for the government or private enterprise or non-governmental organizations, I think everybody has the same general goal, and it's quite a satisfying field to practice in.
He also offers some suggestions on specific classes that could be beneficial to environmental lawyers.
Well, I'd say the first and most important course is not one of the environmental courses, but rather administrative law, because most of, certainly the pollution control laws and many of the natural resource laws are based on administrative law, so understanding that system is very important. And then taking environmental law as a course, many schools then have more specialized programs, and depending on then whether you're interested in litigation or something, it can be very useful to have particular skills courses as well.
The large number of law practices that are available to law students and current lawyers continue to grow, but for those that are interested in environmental law should know the difference between this practice and the others. Amy says it's a very specialized and technical law practice.
It's highly specialized. It's very technical. You don't have to have necessarily a scientific background, but you definitely have to pick up the lingo and be able to understand, highly technical issues about what kind of impacts are going to result from a certain project. You have to work with, a lot of our experts are scientists and PhD, biologists, marine biologists, and different folks like that. A lot of them are in academia, so you end up, it's very technical and very, very specialized. And then also, as I mentioned, it's really, you have some basic common law principles that you apply in your arguments, but generally, you're looking a lot to the plain language of the statute and in some plain language and sometimes statutory interpretation. And I've never practiced in other areas of law, so comparing it to other areas is a little bit difficult because I don't have anything to base a comparison on. I just based on my taking classes in law school and comparing what I do now to some of the other the kind of cases that we read about when we were in law school. That's how I see it as being different.
On the same topic, John says environmental law is highly based in science.
Well, one of the most significant things is that it's really highly based in science, and though you don't need to be have a science background to be an environmental lawyer, and many of the pioneers in the field certainly weren't, it really does help, and it certainly is important to understand basic scientific concepts, because the lawyers often are a means of translation between the technical, whether it's in regulations or scientists and engineers that are trying to assure that projects have the smallest environmental impact as possible, and translating what they're doing to the people that are making decisions. So science and engineering technology are all really a large part of what environmental lawyers are dealing with.
Finally, our guests offer their final advice to anyone interested in this type of law.
Well, I'd say it definitely is a specialized subject. I think it's a really very interesting field to practice in. It's one that I think if you should go into it if you are interested in protecting the environment, and recognize that you can do it from multiple perspectives and points of view, and to read widely about it. It's not just coursework, but paying attention to what the environmental issues are. You need to, when you're practicing, you need to be doing that as much as paying attention to the law. It's not just about the law, but a broader perspective of things.
Well, again, it's easier for me to speak as a public interest attorney, and so my advice in that area would be to investigate some resources like Equal Justice Works, which is a national organization. They provide fellowships. They're paid, essentially they paid, I received one of those Equal Justice Works fellowship. It paid my salary for 2 years to come work at the Environmental Law Project. So there are funding opportunities like that will, the public interest world is difficult because it's all based on donations and grants. So hardly any organization has a lot of money just floating around ready to hire somebody. The way I ended up getting a job in this field was I went out and found my own money to come work here and start doing this work, and then ended up working myself into a niche where I was able to sustain this position. But I think that, we're investigating resources like that. If you're interested in public interest law, the Equal Justice Works, and then there are some various types of fellowship programs, getting involved in the Public Interest Law Society. I know Pam Robinson at USC is a good resource, and she's kind of got a good feel for public interest work throughout the state. So some of those, if you're interested specifically in public interest law, would be a good way to start. And always, I'm willing to talk to anybody at all that wants to call or email and talk about possibilities or ask for advice. And I think most members of the bar are generally willing to do that as well. Even my colleagues that represent development interest and that represent industry are pretty easy to talk to, and I'm sure would be glad to talk to students that are interested in investigating the possibility of practicing in environmental law. So talking to members of the bar, we're always glad to talk specifically about what practice is like. It's hard to cover all of that in a quick conversation with you, but I'm definitely available and glad to talk to people about what it's like, and whether it's something that a law student might want to consider doing in the future.
Thank you for listening to PowerScore's podcast series. If you want more information on PowerScore's podcasts or services, please visit PowerScore.com, or you can call 1-800-545-1750.